I'm Ellen Brown, President of the Rotary Club of Harrisburg. We're part of an international community and humanitarian service organization comprised of 1.4 million members in over 44,000 clubs in more than 200 countries. Rotary leads the world in volunteer service. For more than 112 years, the Rotary Club of Harrisburg has organized impactful local service projects that changes lives and creates hope where it's needed most. Please join us at a Rotary luncheon at the Hilton, service on a Monday, or a Rotary alternate meeting to meet our members who are waiting to welcome you. You can find out more about us at hbgrotary.org. Please like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We hope to welcome you as a member soon. At this point, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ryan Unger, who will introduce our speaker today.
Thank you, President Ellen, and good afternoon, everybody. Gives me great pleasure to introduce today our speaker for a long-awaited and I think heavily anticipated update in the Broad Street market, Eric Hagerty. Eric Hagerty is the current chair of the Broad Street Alliance, and also in his, I would say, day job, but I think we both know you're doing a lot of work. But if you see anyone from Mercury Public Affairs, he is working 50 hours a week for them, and then also 50 hours a week for the Broad Street Alliance. But Mercury Public Affairs is a bipartisan public strategy firm working with some of the world's most successful companies, advocacy group governments, NGOs, and prominent public and political figures. He's a former Secretary of Education for the Commonwealth, overseeing the Pennsylvania Department of Education, which is a $22 billion organization with the oversight of our 500 public schools, more than 170 public charter schools, public cyber charter schools, and their stakeholders as well. Prior to leading the Pennsylvania Department of Education, where I had a chance to get to know and work with Eric, he served as Deputy Chief of Staff to Governor Tom Wolf, responsible for developing and implementing the governor's priority and strategic initiatives relating to education, health, human services, and infrastructure. Notable achievements while he was at the governor's office includes writing the landmark legislation that created Penny, Pennsylvania's state-based health insurance exchange, creating and developing the Opioid Command Center, and helping navigate Pennsylvania through the COVID-19 pandemic. Prior to that, he helped run Governor Wolf's successful campaign for governor in Pennsylvania, serving as deputy campaign manager in 2014, campaign manager for Pittsburgh Mayor Bill Peduto in 2013, and was Allegheny County Executive Rich Fitzgerald's finance director for several years, starting with his first successful campaign in 2011. Eric, I think most importantly, I think in my eyes here, came to Harrisburg to work and now has settled to live. And it's been great to see Eric throughout that period of time really embrace Harrisburg, not just as a place for him, again, to live and work, but to embrace it as his community. And I think you'll see that when you hear from him today. He lives here with his wife and two dogs, which I think are adorable, Eric, and has really done incredible work and rallied. Who would think that battling the opioid crisis and COVID-19 would be number 2 and 3 in terms of the challenges Eric's faced in the last 10 years. But the Broad Street market, certainly in terms of its importance and relevance to our community, not only as a place to gather and get food, but really a heartbeat, certainly, of Midtown and our city. And it's all hands on deck. And Eric, I know, is going to talk to you about an update. But as we hear him speak, I hope we all think about what we can do going forward to help Eric as well. So without further ado, Eric Hagerty.
It is afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Ryan, thank you very much for those kind words. If you can repeat those into the microphone, I'd like to share them with my parents. Realize that I'm not just, being a bum on the East Coast. My family lives on the West Coast. So very kind of you. Thank you. It's great to be here with all of you. Gonna run through a few things. I'll try to be brief here so we get through it all. And I'll also say I would rather this be a dialogue instead of me just talking at you. So interrupt and tell me to shut up at any point if something raises a thought in your mind. I've got some really, really boring and dry financial documents that I want to share with everyone so you can really get into the granular detail of the market's finances if you should be so inclined. Going to walk through the history, talk about the impacts of the fire, give some operational updates. We've got an exciting update this week relating to the tent across from the stone building, and then talk about the brick building's reconstruction timeline and ways folks might be able to help if you're able and willing. Is it anyone here not been to the Broad Street Market? It's okay if you haven't, you can admit it. Okay, if you haven't, it's still open despite the fire, Thursday through Saturday in the stone building. Lots of fantastic vendors. It was actually established in 1860, originally feeding the 300,000 Union soldiers stationed at Camp Curtin during the Civil War, and has expanded since then. It is allegedly the oldest continuously operating market in America. I don't know where that factoid comes from, but we've been saying it, so I'm going to keep saying it. Yeah. Of course, last year in July, the fire destroyed the historic brick building, displacing dozens of vendors. Foot traffic was down, I think, about 70% from that, as was revenue to the market. The brick building's the largest of the buildings. It's cost the market about $25,000 a month in rent revenue. And I should pause here to sort of explain the governance of the market, which makes no sense, but is how this thing really works, which is that the city owns the building and the property. The Market Alliance is responsible for the operations and the maintenance. So the Market Alliance collects revenue from the vendors that operate in the buildings to help cover expenses in theory. And then the city is sort of turned over the keys, essentially. For the new temporary structure across from the stone building, it's even a little more complicated in that Millworks owns the land, the city owns the building, and today, actually, the Alliance will get the keys to the building officially turned over to us. So it is a very complicated governance arrangement. The lease agreement between the city and the Market Alliance includes stipulations that require city participation in market operations to some extent. So when we get into some of the nuance here, people should understand that that's why this is so complicated oftentimes. So of course, when the brick building burned down, the brick building, for folks who have not spent a lot of time at the market, was the building that had most of the produce and groceries. The stone building is more of like a place to get prepared meals from food vendors. So losing access to food essentially in a place that is a USDA designated food desert is just a major challenge for the area. And I will also say, because I think a lot of folks probably don't appreciate that, just because it is in Midtown does not mean that it does not serve low-income communities and people of color. More than half of the vendors that operate in the market are minority-owned businesses. I would be venture to guess, if anyone came by the market at lunch, on Thursday of this week, 80% of the customers there are people of color. It is a really, really diverse, vibrant place that I think sometimes people think, oh, because it's on where it is on 3rd Street, it must not be like that, but it really is. So I joined the board in January. I want to be clear here also that Dr. Ski is a mentor of mine. I'm going to say some critical things of the market. It has nothing to do with his time on the board. Much of this happened in the intervening time between Dr. Ski's departure from the board, an intervening board that has really changed starting in January. So I wanted to acknowledge that. When I joined the board in January, the market was down to about $4,000 in its bank account. When we first walked into the office where the market manager was working, we found papers everywhere. We found like $50,000 in delinquent and unpaid bills, things like insurance premiums, vendors, hood vents hadn't been serviced in years. There are just all sorts of deferred maintenance problems, financial mismanagement on, again, not on the part of the board, but on the part of the manager. The manager is no longer with the market, and a trio of us board members are sort of serving as interim market managers. In the meantime, I'm usually at the market 3 days a week. My colleague Venus is working out of the market 3 days a week. My employer, Mercury Public Affairs, does not know that I'm doing this. So our little secret, please don't tell them. Thank you, Ryan, for that plug. So thankfully, all of my clients have understood, and they're, happy, at least as far as they tell me. So just really had never seen anything like this in terms of, not having things like workers' compensation insurance on file, just some of the basics that I think anyone who runs a business is probably familiar with as being kind of a baseline of a healthy operation. The board in between Dr. Ski and I had proposed doubling the rent of all of the vendors in order to make ends meet. And so that was my first meeting on the board in January, was that vote. And we were ultimately able to avoid having to do that. We paused, that potentially really disastrous rent increase on the existing vendors and kind of sharpened pencils and went through line by line every transaction in the bank account. We are now in a much, much better place thanks to the Harrisburg community. We got a major $30,000 gift from the Penn Social Association. So many local businesses have stepped up to provide support. If I had known Justin was going to be here, I would not have put his company's logo on here just to bust his chops. But, folks like Midtown Property Management offering to take care of the market's property maintenance and property management for free for 5 years. Huge help. Really can't thank them enough. That's saving us hundreds and hundreds of dollars a month. PPL, Capital Region Water, agreed to deferred payment plans with the market. We've been attempting to pay down the $50,000 in unpaid bills that we discovered. I'm thrilled to say that as of next month, we will be debt-free and we'll be current all of our utility liabilities. And again, it's thanks to everyone who's chipped in. Carly and the folks from Members First are a new banking partner of ours. We hope that we will ultimately, several months down the line, be in a financial position that will earn us a line of credit. And they have been super helpful to help us get on that path of financial sustainability. Enders Insurance has been tremendously helpful for us to become compliant with all of our insurance requirements. One of the challenges after the fires that the market did not have loss of revenue insurance. So the $25,000 a month in lost revenue, there was no way to recoup that for the Market Alliance. Now the city collected upwards of $40 million, but because of this bizarre governance model, we weren't able to tap into any of that for the actual market operations. So the folks from Enders have been fantastic to help us get operationally sound. And then, the Berg has been running free advertising and has waived about $3,000 in unpaid advertising bills that the market had owed them. So we are in a much better spot. Again, by the end of next month, everything will be, I think, budgets are still tight. We can't afford to hire a market manager still at the moment. So I think the three of us will continue to sort of perform that function for free collectively until the market's at a point where we can't afford that, or until we get fired by our real jobs. I share all of these financial documents that I put together in hopes that smart people like you can help me figure out what we are missing. We've done things like figure out more cost-effective ways to save utility funds through energy efficiencies. A Hornung's Industrial Light installed $20,000 worth of new lighting in the stone building that's cut our utility bills in half. So that type of community input has just been essential to us. So if you see something in these documents, it's like, oh my God, why are you paying that much for this service? Or you should be paying for something else that I don't see here. Please let us know, because I'm an idiot and I don't know what I'm doing. And I need all of your help to make this work. So it's been a really challenging 4 months, but I think we are finally out of the woods in terms of the worst of this being over. And I'm thrilled that this week, finally, against all odds, this temporary structure across from the stone building is going to open. I know it looks like a tent on the outside. It is much more than a tent on the inside. And I hope these pictures kind of do it some justice. But if you check it out, I think you will be shocked by the amenities that are inside of this thing. It is not just a tent with tables on the inside. I mean, there are real like cooking elements and HVAC. There are actually some folks in the stone building who I think are jealous that they don't get to go into the tent because of how much higher quality the amenities are. So we've got a bunch of vendors who were displaced by the brick building who will finally be opening up shop Thursday in the tent, as well as a handful of new vendors. So please check out the tent on Thursday. We're going to be having a naming competition at some point to come up with a better term than tent, because that's a terrible name for this thing. So welcome any and all ideas on that as well. Now, the big question is the reconstruction timeline for the brick building. My understanding is that once a construction manager is selected, it will take up to 2 years to finish the rebuild of the brick building. The city, who again is responsible for conducting this procurement and using the insurance revenue that they've received to pay for this rebuild, finished their procurement process a little over a month and a half ago. And unfortunately, last week, City Council voted down the approval of the construction manager. So we are in many ways back at square one. There is one opportunity for City Council to change their mind, and it is on May 28th. Their parliamentary rules, Rule 13 to be specific, allows them to reconsider a prior vote only at the immediately following meeting, and only if one of the original folks who voted yes make a motion to do so. The 2 council members who voted yes were Shemaine Daniels and Asha Green. We're very grateful for their support. And we are hopeful that on May 28th, one of the 2 of them will make a motion to reconsider, and somehow we'll be able to persuade the 5 council members who voted the procurement down to change their mind. If that vote fails, the city will have to restart the entire process, and it will likely be 6 months to a year before construction can begin if City Council approves the next procurement outcome. So we are in a very difficult position at the market where we're sort of stuck in the middle of a fight between City Council and the mayor's office. And I'm hopeful that cooler heads will prevail and we will be able to move forward. I've had some productive discussions with City Council members over the last few days, have more later today. So appreciate everyone's sort of continued push to make sure that everyone at the city understands that it's just not acceptable to allow this project to languish any longer than it has been. It's been 10 months and not a brick has been laid to start the rebuild of the brick building. So it's time to get moving. How you all can help, as I mentioned, please look through those financial documents and let me know what I'm getting wrong. We are going to try to identify a strategy to secure naming rights for either individual buildings or the market as it stands entirely. You know, if we were able to get, 100,000 to $250,000 a year in a naming rights sponsorship, that would go a long way to hiring a competent market manager. One of the challenges, the market's had 15 market managers in the last 20 years because the position pays like $60,000, doesn't come with benefits. It's not the type of place that you can really build a career at. So if we were able to do something like obtain corporate sponsorships or naming rights, that would go a long way to not only just start fixing the buildings, but also afford to hire high quality staff. Please reach out to City Council members and urge them to vote to move the construction forward. And then if any of you or your organizations have expertise, time, resources, please let me know. Again, we would be in just such a worse shape if it weren't for all of the folks I mentioned earlier from the community, like Justin and Carly, that have just done a tremendous amount to be supportive. So that's my spiel. Appreciate the chance to come chat with all of you. Happy to answer questions. Okay.
Aaron,
Yeah.
First of all, thank you and congratulations. Nice job. Very nice job. Task, there's no doubt. So you're navigating well. So I thank you for that.
Very kind.
As far as city council, would you recommend that we write each city council member with some type of note that says, please reconsider, or what would be your directive to us?
Yeah, that would be great. Calls, emails, letters. Again, they have one opportunity to fix this, and it's May 28th. So very much appreciate anyone's willingness to do
And
that.
our ask is to have them reconsider.
Yep.
That's the ask.
I want to piggyback on fee. I just had a couple go arounds with city council park. And I suggest that we attend the meeting. Because there is a time that, the public can voice their opinion. And if we could piggyback on what I told them was coming was the beginning of more of a private public partnership to get Harrisburg where we'd like it to be. It might resonate. It did in my case.
Yeah, if folks are able to attend on Tuesday, the 28th, 6 p.m. at City Hall. I was at the last meeting where they voted this down and there were only 3 people there. So I do think that seeing real human beings in person who support the market is very helpful.
Hi, I used to be on city council, and what I always told people when they were bringing a large group of people with the same purpose or the same goals, get together beforehand and make sure everyone does not talk about the exact same thing. If everybody has a little bit to, something else to add to it, whether it is a personal experience in the market, whether it is a someone who is, is the owner of the business, has a farm or whatever, and this was the only way of selling their product. Or where they have had to go or had to buy space elsewhere in the interim. Anything like that, as well as what you'd be willing to do if they approve this and if it gets going forward. Those are all kinds of things that you talk about and have everybody speak to something a little bit different instead of everybody getting up and saying, please put this on your agenda, or please approve this. Because then you have much more impact.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think having folks who are vendors there speaking to the personal impact of continuing to not generate income for their business, market patrons who are there. It definitely, the more it isn't sort of not just me as a board member, I think the more impactful it will be.
Why did it take 10 months to get to where you are now? That's number one. Number two, if you don't get there next week, you got to start all over. 3, the funding that the governor promised you is in this year's budget, which you have not given them a number yet. So that's another concern, because if it goes to another cycle, there's no guarantee you're going to get anything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are great points. So in order, why did it take 10 months? It's partially because government construction is challenging. There was no disaster declaration issued when the fire happened. When I was in the governor's office, oftentimes the first thing you do is declare a disaster emergency because it allows you to waive a bunch of bureaucratic requirements. That did not happen. And I think that was one reason why the sort of normal slow pace of government procurement happened with the tent. The other reason, in all honesty, why the tent took 10 months is, to my point earlier, it is not just a tent. I think when you see the insides and how sophisticated the equipment is in there, it made a little more sense to me once I actually saw what they were building, because I similarly was like, oh my God, it's been 3 months. I could put up a tent in 3 months, right? I could spend my lifetime trying to build what they built in there and it would never get close. So that's the tent and that timeline. In terms of the state funding, you're correct. And I believe Representatives Kim and Mattson are going to be reaching out to City Council to explain the ways in which their vote is complicating their ability to secure funding for the market at the state level. Now, I do want to be clear, though, when you talk about not submitting a number, this gets back to our governance challenge, which is that the city will be the recipient of the funding. We need the city to tell the state reps how much money they need to close the gap for the reconstruction project, because none of the money flows through us and we don't manage that project. So this is, again, where we're sort of at the mercy of the elected officials who are putting these funding packages together. But I know that I can tell you, I've spoken with the state representatives who are working very hard to try to get the city the money they need to make sure that this thing is better than ever once it's rebuilt.
I agree with that. I must admit that I've already met with David, and so when I asked you the question, I kind of knew the answer, but I wanted you to tell them what you thought about the whole thing.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other softballs like that would be good.
So donations that are coming in now, or that you're requesting for naming rights, et cetera, they go to your portion of the governance, not to the city, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Yep. So, Justin recently informed me that we need to replace the roof of the stone building. That's going to be well over $100,000. That money's going to have to come out of the market's operating account. So that's where donations and, if we hopefully can start to secure grants that will go directly to the market's operations, can help to begin improving the facilities.
So what's the city responsible for if they're not responsible for the roof?
The city is only responsible for rebuilding the brick building and building the tent. So I can tell you that the lease agreement between the Market Alliance and the city was drafted in 2017, I believe. It expired many, many years ago and is on a month-to-month sort of in perpetuity moving forward status. We do need to renegotiate that. The lease says that basically the market's on the hook for everything to maintain the buildings, all of that. So we're sort of stuck with the lease we have at the moment. So.
Can you explain maybe a little more in detail or articulate why City Council, what their reasoning was for denying the construction, so that we would have a better understanding if we went to them as to negate their reasons?
Yeah, I think, the good faith explanation, as they have stated it, is that it's clear that they have had long-standing frustrations over the city's lack of utilization of minority and women-owned businesses in receiving public contracts. I know that they adopted a disparity study a couple years ago, which we have also adopted at the Harrisburg Housing Authority. And, I don't want to get into the personal dynamics, but there's clearly a palpable frustration on the part of city council members, and understandably so, that so few contracts are awarded to minority-owned firms. And this just seems to be sort of the breaking point in their discussions with the mayor's office over what are we going to do to fix that. So what I have tried to say is, I think it's certainly a worthy goal. Harrisburg owes it to its residents to have public contracting reflect the community. If they're not doing that currently, then we should fix that. We can improve procurement transparency. We can work harder to develop a pipeline of minority and women-owned contractors. We can make sure that the right people have the seat at the table in selection processes. Now, I think that does not have to be mutually exclusive with starting the rebuild of the brick building, though. And I'm encouraging both sides to sort of get in a room and improve the procurement process moving forward without throwing out the results of a procurement that's already been conducted. And I worry that if they don't do that, the city is opening itself up to a whole host of litigation and the appearance of, public corruption and trying to steer bids one way or another. So it's very messy. But I we have this problem at the state level when I was there, that so few public contracts were awarded to minority-owned firms, and worked hard to improve that over time. And I'm confident the city can too, if the right folks get in the room together. But that's sort of the stated objection.
You mentioned the need for state funding. Are the insurance proceeds not adequate to cover the rebuild?
My understanding is that there are certain aspects of the rebuild that are ineligible to be covered by insurance. So the construction manager and the architect being two of the big pieces that, for some reason, as a non-insurance expert, it sounds like their insurance won't cover, so they will need state funding. I know the construction manager contract was a little less than $1 million. I'm not sure what the architectural contract will be, but I know they're trying to cover those expenditures. And then I believe there are complications around expenditures that maybe go above and beyond what the original state of the building may have been. So different improvements over what was there before, I think, requires a different fund source.
What entity in the city has the heavy lift on this? Is it HRA? I mean, who?
I don't believe HRA is involved. I know that Dave Baker is the guy that I've primarily been working with, and he led the procurement process. And he's also been responsible for constructing the tent. So, and they have, Dave Baker has worked his tail off. I mean, the guy, I was with him at the market this morning. He's there almost every day trying to fix this place. So can't say enough kind words about, the staff at the city who are really similarly kind of stuck.
The
We have
fire
time.
damage, I'm sorry, Ellen.
I was just gonna say time for one.
Oh.
You're it, David.
The fire damage really illustrated how that market building was built in 3 phases, the brick house. The phase closest to Sixth Street, where the fire was most severe, almost charred to a cinder and nothing left inside. The center section lost part of its roof and windows and so forth, and much of the interior. But the section closest to the Market Plaza, very minimally damaged because of the firewalls between. It's like 3 row houses in the way it was built, and I think that's a fortunate thing for not having to totally tear it down to the ground and rebuild it. I think those brick walls and a lot of the original construction can be reused. We won't know for sure until the architects and engineers examine it. But I've heard observers who are more knowledgeable than I about historic preservation, particularly of a load-bearing brick wall like that. It's numerous bricks thick, and it looks like it's only suffered minimal loss of the actual brickwork.
Yeah, I can barely patch drywall, so you know better than me. But, makes sense to me. And I also say, I think it's an interesting opportunity once we can actually start the rebuild to rethink what was in the building. And I would love for it to become more of a community hub than just sort of a food location. Imagine if there was an outpatient medical clinic where someone could get a flu shot or get their blood pressure checked, or if Members First had a kiosk where they could help people with financial literacy. I mean, you'd be amazed at how many of the vendors at the market don't have bank accounts and are operating out of Cash App and things like that. So I think we can get those types of community service functions in that building. If like 5 to 10% of the real estate is used for purposes like that, I think we can make it a much more dynamic place than but the primary purpose being food. So anyway, thank you again for having me. Really appreciate it.